Hey everybody, Tim Albrecht here. Welcome to this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast, where we feature questions from you, the YFP community, to be answered by one of YFP Planning's fee-only certified financial planners. Before we jump into today's question, I want to give a shout out to YFP Planning's incredible team that makes this segment possible. YFP Planning offers fee-only comprehensive financial planning services that are customized to the pharmacy professional. You can learn more about those one-on-one services and book a free discovery call by visiting yfpplanning.com. Again, that's yfpplanning.com. Okay, this week's question comes from Justin in Nassau County, New York.
Hi, Tim and Tim. My name is Justin from Nassau County, New York, and I'm a longtime follower of YFP. I was recently categorized as a highly compensated employee and was written a check for an over-contribution. I was wondering if you guys can speak to some options I have for investing for retirement, if I have already maxed out my Roth IRA and don't have access to an HSA. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Justin, for submitting your question to be featured on this week's Ask a YFP CFP segment of the Your Financial Pharmacist Podcast. Tim Baker, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it makes sense, Tim, to unpack this a little bit, because I think this is a point of confusion for a lot of people that are in this situation. And for, pharmacists, unfortunately, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. You're highly compensated, but, you're kind of restricted in a way you can, contribute to your retirement plan in a lot of ways. So for 2022, a worker who earns more than $135,000 in compensation from their employer is categorized as highly compensated. So, and this is kind of in line with if the employer has a 401k. So what happens? So if you make 135,000 or more, you're an HCE, a highly compensated employee. So the IRS requires employers to ensure that pre-tax benefit plans don't favor highly compensated employees through non-discrimination testing. So basically what it says is that people that get paid higher shouldn't have like an outweighed benefit for the 401k. So there kind of has to be a little bit of like an even ground. So if you have a group of people that are making a six-figure income that are putting in, 10+% into the 401k, and people that are making $50,000 or less are putting in 2%, then the IRS says like, this doesn't work for us. So if you qualify as an HCE, your maximum contribution limits are tied to the participation rates of the employees in the company. So, and then the rules are tied to that you can't contribute more than 2% above the average contributions of other employees in the plan. So let's pretend that the company ABC, we look at all of the employees, and the average employee, whether they're highly compensated or not, is putting in 5%. And I'm a highly compensated employee and I'm putting in 8%. That's actually 1% more, because the most I can put in is 7%, 2% above the average contribution. So I have to get a check back to basically right size. Or the other thing that is fairly uncommon is where the employer actually puts money into people's accounts. And this actually happened, Tim, when we first started our 401k at YFP. The other caveat is you can be highly compensated if you make $135,000 or more, or you are a 5% owner in the company. So when we were contributing to our 401ks from the get-go, we kind of violated this non-discrimination testing. So we actually elected to put more money in to kind of like right-size everything because we're awesome. But in most cases, the employers will say, we got to take money out of these highly compensated employee 401ks, and then you can do, with it what you will. Now, from the employer perspective, they should be kind of campaigning more for people and working with their provider, whoever provides the 401k, to encourage more people to contribute. So, the kind of the tide, rises with everybody. So that's kind of the maybe convoluted explanation of the highly compensated deal that the IRS is just trying to make sure that people aren't left to the side. Now, the question that Justin poses is like, now that I have this check, like, what should I do? So there's a few things that he's already mentioned about like maxing out your IRA, which I'm hoping that he's doing a non-deductible traditional IRA contribution and then doing a backdoor Roth IRA strategy, because he can't contribute. In most cases, he's not going to be able to contribute directly to the Roth. And then he says he doesn't have access to the HSA. So the non-deductible IRA contribution, the backdoor strategy, and the HSA are three of the things that you can do. So those are off the table for him since he's either doing them or doesn't have access.
Mm-hmm.
If Justin is over age 50, you can make catch-up contributions. So you're allowed to, once you reach a certain age, you're allowed to make catch-up contributions to the retirement accounts and to the IRAs. So that typically has nothing to do with the highly compensated rules.
Right.
So there might be some, bucket to fill there. The other thing that I would probably talk to HR about is what, for a lot of highly compensated employees, Tim, sometimes they have access to a deferred comp plan.
Mm-hmm.
The 457 plan is typically the most common. So this allows you to defer a percentage of your salary and taxes on that salary until a later date, typically when you retire or quit. And the options are going to be similar in terms of how you invest. And you can typically get that money a little bit more easily than, say, a 401k. The big drawbacks to these plans, Tim, are these deferred comp plans are typically looked at as an asset to the company. So if the company goes bankrupt, like you could potentially lose that money. And then also there's some funky payout schedules that, when you leave or retire, you have to understand like how you get your money out, if it's paid out over 5, 7, 10, or a lump sum. The other things that I would look at, Tim, if I'm Justin, is I would probably make sure that you're coordinating, and this is sometimes an obvious thing that people just don't look at, is like, what's the spouse doing? So Justin, if you're married, is your spouse doing everything in that regard to like max out his or her buckets, right? So making sure that, they're maxing out their 401k, et cetera. And sometimes that, we just kind of operate in our own tunnel, and that might be something to look at. The other thing is to open up a taxable account. So there's really no limits here. You can kind of do what you want. Now you have to pay either long-term or short-term capital gains, but that's typically one of the easiest things to look at. So, and another reason that you would do this is if you want to retire, say before that 59 and a half, I want to retire at 55.
Mm-hmm.
To me, that taxable account is what is going to get you from 55 to 60. So that's kind of your early retirement bucket. So that would be another place that I would look at. And then you have your kind of, the non-traditional things where it could be real estate, you could put money into, could be digital assets like, crypto, which is obviously taking a beating just like everything else. I think other advisors might push more like insurance, like whole life or annuities. I wouldn't go down that route, but I would say, outside of what you're doing, I would probably look at, if you're below 50, obviously ignore the catch-up contribution. I would talk to HR about deferred comp plans. And then from there, talk to the spouse about what they're doing just to make sure it jives with everything else, the taxable account, holding real estate, or even getting into kind of the digital asset space, which I think, as time goes on, people are going to have some exposure, whether that's 1% or 2% in digital assets, because I think that's going to be here to stay.
Tim, this is another great example. Since you didn't say it depends, I'll say it depends for you. But, I'm thinking of all the things you just talked about, right? Age, is there a catch-up, contribution component? Is it not? Is there a spouse involved? Is there opportunities there or not? What are your goals? What are we trying to achieve? Are we on track? Are we not on track? What's the goals look like for long-term saving? What's your tax situation, look like? And you talked about several of the strategies there. One other thing I'd throw in the mix, just because we talked about it not too long ago, and it's top of mind for everyone right now with inflation, would be, is this a place for the I bond to be thinking about as well?
Yeah, totally.
So we talked about that on episode 239. Again, not investment advice, but something to consider. We talked about inflation and I bonds in 239. I would also point people, since you mentioned, Tim, the several things in the bucket around investing beyond the more traditional accounts. On episode 163, we talked about investing beyond the 401k, 403b. And on episode 189, we talked about options for investing when you're already maxing out those traditional accounts. So make sure to check out those episodes as well. And we also have some other resources on the website related to the backdoor Roth IRA, since Tim mentioned that as well. So Justin, great question. I feel like it allowed us to talk through several different angles and considerations. Another good example of really the importance of customizing, one's financial situation, depending on all the factors, the goals, tax situation, and several of the things that we discussed. So really appreciate you taking the time to submit a question. Also appreciate you being a longtime listener and your support of the show. That means a lot to us. As a small thank you for submitting your question, we're going to be sending you a super comfy YFP t-shirt. And for those listening, we would love to hear from you with the question that you have. You can submit that question by emailing us info@yourfinancialpharmacist.com, or you can record that question directly by visiting yourfinancialpharmacist.com/ask-YFP. As we wrap up this week's episode of the Ask a YFP CFP segment of the podcast, an important reminder that the content in this podcast is provided to you for informational and educational purposes only, is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. For more information on this, you can visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer. Thanks so much for listening and have a great rest of your week.